Hi, Lauren, and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast. How are you?
Hi Anna, thanks so much for having me. I'm really good, thank you.
Beautiful. Everyone listening will think you're from the UK, which you are, but you're actually living in New Zealand, and that's where you birthed your baby. So take us
Yeah.
to becoming pregnant and deciding to have a home birth. Was that always obvious for you?
I think it had crossed my mind kind of, I hadn't thought about being pregnant like in the sense of planning it, but when you kind of just have things coming in and out of your mind a few years ago, I was like, I don't know what I would do. I didn't know about home birth and I was like, but it doesn't feel right to go to the hospital. And it was during the whole COVID time. And I kind of thought about it and then it kind of just left my mind. And then I, of course, got pregnant and I was like, it doesn't align with me to go to the hospital. So I kind of was like, what am I going to do? And your podcast was like one of the first times that I knew home birth was a thing. So I was at the gym and I was still in shock that I was pregnant because it wasn't planned. And I even remember the machine I was on because it was obviously such like a pivotal moment. And I just typed into the podcasts because I'd always listen to a podcast at the gym and I typed in natural birth and your podcast was the first one that came up. And then the rest was history for me, really. Like I just started listening to them that day and I was like, home birth is the only option.
Wow, I love that. I love that my podcast was the first one you listened to. I love that so much.
Yeah.
So how
It
you were
was
like literally a few weeks pregnant?
yeah, I probably was I know it sounds crazy, but I knew I was pregnant even though I hadn't taken a test. Like I could just feel it in my body.
Yeah.
Um and I yeah, I kind of just I knew I'd always gone down like a more holistic kind of route. And to be honest, like going to the hospital is like a last resort for me. So I guess the word natural and birth just came into my head and like what's it's with everything in my life. I kind of want to do it the more natural route. And so I was just like, that's why I'll type in. And then I was drawn to the podcast.
Love it. So you decided to have a home birth. Did you go with the publicly funded home birth system in New Zealand?
Yeah. So from what I know, like the midwifery system in New Zealand is a bit funny. Like I actually couldn't, I might be wrong, but I couldn't find a private midwife online. I found an independent midwife, like not as in she doesn't work in the hospital.
Hmm.
Like well based out of the hospital.
Hmm.
It was kind of like a separate office. Um, so I wasn't sure how, to be honest, I'm not really 100% sure how that works, but from what I know, the government funds all midwifery here. I'm not sure if you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, it's amazing that that's the case. And so that's very unique for New
Yeah,
Zealand, which is amazing for the midwives who want to work independently. And then they bill the government instead of the woman, which is amazing. And then, of course, there's midwives that work maybe, you know, connected to a hospital and they have a home birth service or a
yeah,
birth center birth service. I think that's the kind of difference. But at the same time, yeah, it's amazing how that is provided for women in New Zealand.
yeah. It was totally amazing. Because I wasn't really sure when I went to the first appointment. Like I was kind of like, am I going to get a massive bill or but I was obviously prepared. Like I was like, I'll just make it happen if I need to. And then she was like, no, it's funded. And so it is amazing in that sense, but at the time it kind of scared me a little bit because I felt kind of when you hand someone your money for a service, you feel more in control.
Mm.
Whereas I felt like because it was funded by the government, I was a bit fearful of kind of like the overreach of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's where you need to like interview your midwife and bring all the hard
Yeah,
questions and talk about all the things to know that you're aligning with the same philosophy and that also to kind of get a sense of how potentially how controlled is she in her practice. And I'm not
yeah,
sure to the depth of that in New Zealand. I do think that midwives are quite autonomous, but I think also there's some things that maybe, oh, you can't, I don't know if you can go over 42 weeks, or I think you can,
Yeah,
I'm not sure, but it's good to have a chat with whichever country you're in, whoever you're speaking to, if it's a publicly
yeah,
funded or a private midwife, how that works. But I understand because in the UK, you have the same system, don't you, with the NHS? Home births
yeah,
are funded by the government, but you also can find privately practicing independent midwives that you do pay. Um,
yeah.
so I don't know about New Zealand if you do have that, if there are midwives that you can pay privately. Maybe there is.
I Yeah, I do you know what? I should have researched it better, but at the time, like before coming on this podcast, but at the time, I'm pretty sure there isn't, which I did think was
Mm,
really weird. But I'll
mm,
have to look into it some more.
mm, mm.
Um, but I think that was definitely a whole journey because kind of like the whole time I felt like the fear that I had wasn't surrounding birth, it was surrounding like the kind of
Yeah,
midwife having to tick the boxes.
totally.
Um,
Totally understand that.
yeah. But it all worked out well in the end.
Beautiful. Yeah, it sounds like
um,
she was very hands off and very respectful of you. How was your pregnancy? Do you want to share a bit about your pregnancy?
yeah, so I went in it from the very beginning, like I really wanted to trust pregnancy, and I kind of went with the approach that everything was fine and it was all going to work out beautifully. And I didn't approach it with any kind of worry. So I'd requested the midwife not use a Doppler, and we used like an old Pinard um, to listen to the baby's heartbeat. And I did actually have one scan during the pregnancy, but it's kind of one of those hindsight things now. Like in at the time, my gut feeling was telling me that it didn't feel natural to have a scan. Um, so I kind of just had one, and then after that, I was like, "That's it, I'm done." I feel like in order for me personally to have full trust in my body, I didn't. That kind of seemed like an intervention a little bit to me during the pregnancy.
Yeah. What ultrasound did you have?
I had the 20-week one,
Mm,
um, but I kind of like I know how inaccurate they are. So I didn't want to. It was almost like getting another scan was going to bring more fear to me, like the fear of them inaccurately telling me that I had a big baby or a small baby.
mm-hmm,
I kind of really just wanted to let the body do its thing.
mm,
Um, and I knew like if there ever was a problem, my body would tell me there was a problem. I
mm,
didn't need someone else to tell me.
mm.
Um,
Beautiful. Do you have a really strong connection to your intuition and your body wisdom?
I really feel like I do. And it kind of goes back to me knowing that I was pregnant before even
Mm-hmm.
taking a test. And kind of everyone around me was like, oh, no, don't be silly. And I was like, no, trust me, I know. I don't need the test to tell me.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. That's something that's so important to cultivate, I think. And what happens actually when you do get pregnant is that your intuition gets stronger.
Yeah.
You become so much more open, and um, you just have a stronger knowing, but you're also much more impressionable because you're also much more sensitive. So it goes both ways. Like your intuition gets stronger, but you also are very much affected by other people's opinions or that around you. So I understand the
Yeah.
feeling of like wanting to safeguard yourself and going like, I want to hear my voice strongest. And I don't want to outsource to the experts to tell me. I want to trust in my inner knowing. And I do believe that, if you are a woman and you know that your intuition is strong and you have a strong kind of um, relationship with your body and your body wisdom, um, then you can trust that. It's
Yeah. I think
women
that's,
who, yeah, it's women who are very much disconnected to their intuition, disconnected to following their rhythms, disconnected to their body, disconnected to, you know what I mean?
yeah.
Then you need to cultivate that relationship in pregnancy or pre-pregnancy to really access that. Not everyone has it. That's why I also asked you, how strong it is, and it
Yeah.
sounds like you had a strong inner knowing. Yeah.
I think like I really do believe that everything happens at like the right point for you. And I kind of feel like maybe if I had had a baby years ago, it would have been completely different. But I
Yeah.
just feel like the timing was so, like, I was at a place where I truly trusted myself. So I
Hmm.
could trust the pregnancy and my baby as
Hmm.
well.
I love that. I love that so much. Beautiful. Is there anything else you want to share before we dive on into the birth story?
No, yeah, that should be good.
Beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
great. So take us to, early signs of labor approaching or how labor started for you and when.
So I kind of the weeks approaching kind of like 38 weeks. I was kind of like, as you do, you know that your body's gonna kind of birth the baby when the time is right, but you getting a little bit antsy. And I was like looking for signs, but there was no signs whatsoever. Um, and then I got to about, I think I got to my 40-week midwife appointment, and she had mentioned, because there'd been no signs or anything, she did bring up the induction word. And
At 40
it's a huge,
weeks?
yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I mean
So
that's
it
on
was,
the list to do. It's on the list to tick, Yeah.
yeah, this was the whole problem. But
Mm.
I feel like that kind of, that was a huge trigger for me to stop being so much of a
Mm.
people pleaser. Um, and I had like, I think it was a chat with her. Well, it was over email, but it was an in-depth email, kind of like a talk that I'd probably needed to have with her for a long time,
Yeah.
about how it kind of shocked me that she would even talk about that after spending so many weeks with me. Um, but of course, on the other hand, I knew, like, it's a government funded midwife. I kind of knew
Mm.
that they have to, they are, they do have to tick the box.
Yeah, that's
Um,
that's how it is, unfortunately. And this is something that
yeah,
really rubs me up the wrong way, that it's brought to women's attention at 40 weeks, and some places
yeah,
even at 37, 38, 39 weeks, when we're not there. And don't
yeah,
get me started on like the induction train, like how unnecessary that is for
yeah,
99% of women. But it shouldn't even be mentioned, according to me, until you're at
yeah.
42 weeks. And even then, I mean, I'm so pro to going past that as well. But like,
Oh,
you know what I mean?
same.
You have a term month. Like most women will birth from 37 weeks to 42 weeks. Actually, a lot of women,
Yeah.
especially first-time moms, will birth somewhere between 40 and 42 weeks. And it's
I
very
think,
common and normal and natural to birth between 41 and 42 weeks. And for some, a very few percentage, they're normal. Their baby's normal. I want everyone to hear me. Normal, a few percentage is 43 weeks.
yeah, I think like I was so thankful that I'd done loads of research. Like I'd obviously delved into your podcast. I used Rachel Reed's midwifery blog for loads. So
Beautiful.
every time my midwife would say anything, I went on her blog and like was like induction, and then I like read all about it. So I felt like I was so grateful that I was fully prepared to kind of like advocate for myself.
Mm.
But it still makes me really angry and upset that kind of like, if you hadn't done that research yourself, I would have booked in for an induction, even though I'd gone to a kind of like a home birth physiological focused midwife. They still wanted to kind of like suggest that. So yeah, it's a crazy system if you haven't
Yeah,
kind of done the research for yourself.
definitely. There's just this fear mongering, especially, going past 41 weeks, which is,
Yeah.
if you actually look at the statistics, if you actually look at the
Yeah.
research, you would not be afraid of the dead baby after 41 weeks.
Well,
That is
this is the
being,
thing.
bombarded to women. Like literally, it goes from like
Yeah.
0.3 to 0.6% or something. And they say
Yeah.
it doubles. It's not even at a freaking percentage. Like
Yeah. So,
seriously. But the induction and what that does to women and the
yeah.
trauma to babies and mothers, that is not talked about.
Yeah.
It's just seen as induction is the best option to prevent a dead baby, which is not true. Not true.
Yeah. I think like they don't, when it's there isn't any such thing in my, I know it's kind of controversial, but my opinion is there's no such thing as informed consent in kind of like the official medical birth system, because they don't tell you, they give you all the benefits of an induction, but they don't tell you the whole negative side effects of it and what the cascade of interventions is going to cause, well, most of the time.
Absolutely.
Um,
And the thing is, it's because there's not enough research has been done on the short-term and long-term consequences. So the only thing that you're looking at, the only thing is like the hours after birth, like it's the immediate
yeah,
postpartum. But the ramifications of that, like the women feeling, oh God, just and the baby and oof, yeah. I mean, we're not going to go on this tangent because we're going to talk about your beautiful
yeah,
birth, but
yeah,
this does
sorry.
trigger us, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Because it's this just the mass disinformation campaign that is going on, and it's getting worse. It's going down, not even at 41 weeks now, but like women are being induced at 40 weeks, 39 weeks
yeah,
with the same reasoning.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's why kind of like your podcast and all the other kind of podcasts and Instagrams and stuff out there is fighting back against it though, which is amazing. And that's why I think it's so important for women to keep sharing their stories.
Mm,
Um, and
yes.
that's obviously why I wanted to share my story as well.
So great. Well, I'm really happy you are. So let's dive on into it.
Okay. Um, it's kind of not gross because it's natural, but the beginning of my labor started on the toilet. I kind of knew I went for a poo about kind of 8 times in an hour. And
Yeah,
I was like, sure, I was like, this has to be it. Because
that's a
obviously that's
sign.
not,
That's a early
yeah,
sign for sure.
yeah. I thought like my body was kind of flushing everything out, getting ready. But of course I didn't know how far away the birth would be. But it was happened on the Wednesday, the 15th at 10 p.m. I kind of went to the toilet. I couldn't stay off the toilet for a whole hour. And then maybe about an hour later at 11 o'clock, that's when the contractions started. Um, they, I'd say it got intense very fast for me. So I kind of had this whole image in my head that I'd like bake a cake during early labor. Like I'd actually bought carrot cake ingredients because I was like, I really want to eat a carrot cake after the baby's born. So I'd kind of envisaged this like really kind of slow labor where I'd ease into it, but the obviously that wasn't right for the baby. So she decided, and my body decided it was going to be incredibly intense straight away. Um, so it got to about maybe half an hour of contractions that were kind of like probably like strong period pains. Um, but I don't even like using the word pain, but I feel like it kind of slips out because we've been programmed to use that word, but it more like I guess the feeling of a period. And then by 12 at night it was like the contractions were kind of like full on every like 1 to 3 minutes. I was I just came into the living room and I could only sit on the floor because my body was just like, you just have to sit on the floor. I tried like sitting on the sofa, and I had in my head that everyone says just go to sleep at the beginning of labor. But for me, that was just not, there was just zero chance that I was going to go to sleep. And I kind of was like, oh, why is this happening at this time of night and not in the morning? But at the same time, I was also like, this, my body knows, of course, what it's doing. So this is the
Absolutely.
time that it has to be.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
usually like natural physiological birth usually kicks off at night. It's very common.
yeah.
Mm.
So it was funny because I'd actually said to myself that I'm not going to time any of the contractions because I just thought that the research that I'd done showed me that it was pointless. Like it, to me, I'd read that you kind of could have contractions really long and often, and you might not birth your baby for 48 hours. So I didn't kind of want to go into it's the same thing, kind of making every woman's birth the same. You time your contractions and, oh, you're going to have your baby soon, and then you don't have your baby for another 24 hours. I kind of didn't want to put the pressure on myself. But for some unbeknown reason, knowing this, I downloaded an app after I started going into labor, and I timed the contractions for about 8 hours. And it obviously told me numerous times now it's time to go to the hospital, but I wasn't going anywhere, of course. But I was like, that's so funny that it's telling me to go to the hospital when the labor actually ended up being so far away in the end.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah,
after,
that's the thing. It's like it's not just the contractions, right?
yeah,
And this is why so many, especially first-time moms, going to the hospital several times during their opening phase, right? During that
yeah,
early labor and being, they're sent home. And then that's so discouraging, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah. Um, it was kind of exciting. Like I just had no idea when the baby was going to come. Like I'd read all sorts of birth stories. Like I'd obviously immersed myself into it, and you hear of women having really fast births that are a couple of hours and then days long. And the whole time when I was in labor, I was just wondering. I was like, is it going to be like 5 more hours, or is it going to be 3 days? Um, but the contractions were kind of quite intense for the whole labor. There was no kind of, until I got into the pool hours later, there was no kind of like on or off. It was more like they were just intense, and it carried on for 20 hours kind of thing,
Yeah. You
which
didn't
was
feel like
not what I was
yeah, you
yeah,
didn't feel a change. It was kind of the same strength and length for all that time.
yeah, like obviously it was going on and off, kind of like 1 minute on, 1 minute off. But I kind of expected to ease into it, whereas it was just like from 12 midnight till I gave birth 20 hours later, it was the same intensity of contractions.
Yeah. Yeah. And that
Um,
happens to some women, and that's normal for them.
yeah, like I think it's so interesting how everyone is just so different, and you do have no idea what's going to happen, but no matter how you get there, it's your body's doing what's right to birth the
Yeah.
baby.
And I think it's also
Um,
really important to like, there's no judgment or no like better birth, It's not
yeah,
better because it goes faster. It's not
yeah,
worse because it's longer or over days, if you can, like, to really, like, it sounds like you did, like, not have an idea about what your birth is going to be like
yeah,
lengthwise, but like even almost like prepare for a really long one and just be
yeah.
in the timelessness of birth.
Yeah, like I tried to be really open-minded that it could be anything. Um, and I think that's why I stopped timing the contractions as well, because I was just like, why am I even doing this? Like it doesn't make a difference. I think
Mm,
maybe at the time it took my mind off it a little bit, even though
yeah,
that doesn't really make any sense. It was kind of something to do when I
yeah.
felt like I couldn't do anything, like I could tap a button.
Hmm.
Um, but it was funny because I looked at the clock and it had already been 8 hours, and it was the fastest 8 hours of my life.
Wow.
It was, yeah. Um, and then my partner, like I'd sent my partner back to bed the previous night because I was like, someone needs to sleep. Like there's no point in both of us kind of being awake the whole night. Um, so he'd got up in the morning, and I was still in the same spot on the floor with my dog for company. And he was like, should we set up the birth pool? And I was like, yeah, because the baby could come any minute. Um, but also they might not come any minute. But I was like, just blow up the birth pool just in case. Um, so he had kind of like started to get the birth pool ready and put some water in it, because at that point I felt like I needed to do something, as I'd just been sat in the same spot for so many hours. So I think at like 12 midday I got into the birth pool. And actually that's I did notice when I got into the pool, it actually slowed down my contractions for the first time,
Mhm.
which I wasn't sure if that was quite common or not.
Yeah, yeah. Especially if it's in, you're still in, quotation mark, in early labor, right?
Yeah,
So usually when you're in really active stage, when you're in, closer towards the birth than not, then usually
yeah,
it doesn't really slow them down.
yeah,
But
um,
yeah, that's definitely one thing with the, because you take away gravity, and gravity does
yeah.
intensify things. Mm.
Um, so I got out of the birth pool because I was like, I really don't want to slow this down.
Mm.
And I kind of just let the contractions carry on, and hours passed again, and then it got to about kind of like 5 p.m. the next day, and things started kind of ramping up. Like I kind of like the contractions. I don't know if they changed, but it was almost like the feeling, like I could feel the baby was kind of like moving.
Hmm.
Um, it's hard to describe because I guess everyone feels it so differently, but I just knew something was happening.
Mm.
Um, and my partner was like, should we call the midwife? Because one of the things that I wanted was to labor for as long as possible. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I wasn't 100% sure I was even going to call the midwife at this point. Like, I kind of wanted to just go with the flow and see how I felt in the moment.
Yeah.
Um, but it had been so long. Well, for me, it felt like it had been so long because I'd not been to sleep.
Yeah.
Um, and I was kind of just like, call the midwife, something's happening. And I was quite exhausted at this point.
Mm.
But I knew kind of like when the baby came out, I was going to get adrenaline and everything was going to be fine. Um, but by the midwife got there about an hour before she emerged, um, which was perfect because I felt like if she came any sooner, it would have interrupted things. Um, so then I knew, this is quite funny. I knew that I was pushing, well, my body was pushing, but I didn't want to tell anyone because I didn't want any kind of like outside pressure. I just wanted to let my body do its thing. Like I didn't even want to tell my partner, because yeah, I just didn't want any of the stress, like to kind or anyone to stress and for me to kind of take on that energy. So
Yeah.
I was just sat in the pool. I knew that I was pushing, but I was just like not telling anyone about it. Um, and it was, yeah, it was really nice. Like it was funny because I felt like the midwife and my partner didn't think that I was aware of what was going on in the room, but I felt like very aware of everything that was happening.
Yeah.
But I wasn't, you hear about like the transition phase and you kind of taken to another planet. But for me, it was quite different. Like I was very like hyper aware,
Mm.
which wasn't something that I expected.
Yeah.
But it's almost like I could hear every little thing that was going on. And I was so grateful to be in my own living room because I was just
Yeah.
thinking, well, not at the time, but I think now, like, it would have been so distracting if I was in a hospital.
Yeah. No, that's very common, like that experience, because you are so open. As I said, like in
Yeah,
pregnancy, your intuition increases, your openness, your sensitivity, but that's just
yeah,
amplified in birth. Like you're hyper aware. And this is something I
yeah,
teach, the women that I teach to become sacred birth workers, like about even your presence, like as a midwife, as a birth worker. Um, it's so important that you, when you're coming into a space, a birth space with a woman, that you're so aware of what you bring, because she'll feel you. She will
yeah,
feel if you're coming with anxious energy, stressful energy, fearful energy, or calm energy, loving energy, a nervous system that's calm. she'll pick that up and you would feel that. You'd feel what's going on in the room so
Yeah.
strongly. That's a part of the superpower of a birthing woman.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I'd also the midwife had offered to do some vaginal exam, but I knew that I didn't want anything like that. So I declined, but I felt compelled to just have a feel for myself. Like I
Yeah,
wasn't sure if I would or not, but
yeah,
I kind of was like, oh, actually, I'll just have it. Like it was kind of not a secret, but like I didn't say I was doing it. Like I just did it because obviously it's
yeah.
my birth and I can do what I want.
Of course, you don't have to
Um,
tell anyone. And I love
yeah.
that. I really
So
encourage women to explore their cervix in pregnancy.
yeah,
And then like if they want, if they feel like you said, like compelled to feel themselves, they can
yeah,
do that because they know what a closed cervix feels like. So they can also then
yeah.
feel what it feels like as you're opening and finally when the head's coming.
Yeah, it was funny at the time when I could feel the head, but at the time I didn't realize it was the head until afterwards, and I'd kind of like told the midwife I felt this squishy object, which it makes sense that it was, but I guess like in the moment you don't really realize. I guess I didn't realize that the head would be squishy a little bit.
Had your waters broken before this?
Oh, yeah, I forgot to say about that actually. My waters broke at about midday.
Okay.
And I ended up giving birth at 6 p.m.
Mm,
Well, 6:09. But I had my waters broken. I had a little bit of bloody show at 12 p.m. Um, and then yeah, I just carried on.
yeah.
Like they kind of just broke, and then I just carried on. Like I knew it was
Yeah.
all just a part of it.
Part of it, yeah. So you're in the birth pool, you're pushing, you're feeling for the head, it feels a bit squishy, and then what?
Yeah. Then I was determined to just go with the flow and let my body do all the pushing. And then I think it was about an hour of pushing, and the head was kind of moving in and out of my perineum, like she kept kind of like bopping in and out.
Hmm.
And I never wanted to take any direction from anyone because I just knew, like, actually going back a little bit, with the positions that I was in, I tried to not focus on learning any positions. Like, I just wanted my body to tell me what position I would be in.
Love that.
Um, which again was the exact opposite of what I thought it would be. Like you presume all these things, and then at the time your body's like, no, actually, this feels better.
Yeah.
So I was actually leaning back a little bit, which I really didn't think that I would do. Not like fully, but I was kind of just leaning back on the birth pool,
Yeah.
and that felt like the only option for me. But at this time, I think like everyone could tell, well, the head was bopping in and out kind of thing. And my partner had got into the pool to kind of like hold me a little bit because it was quite intense, kind of like waiting for her to do her thing and
Yeah.
come out and my body. And at that moment, I decided that I was kind of fed up waiting to meet her, and I decided to help push with a contraction. So I waited for the next contraction to come, and I kind of just braced my muscles and pushed. And that's when a head came out. And then I just did the next thing on the next contraction. We just waited. There was like no rush or anything. And I just waited for that. And then I just gave it another push. And that's when her body came out. Um, and it was just an amazing moment. Like my partner was in the pool with me and he helped catch her. And the midwives were incredible at this point. Like they completely just stepped back. Like there was no rushing to the baby. Like it was me and my partner. No one tried to interfere. And that was everything that I dreamed of. Like that was exactly how I envisaged it. Um, yeah, and then she let out a cry immediately, which I also was prepared not to happen. Like I knew it can take a while for the babies to come around. But yeah, she was pretty vocal straight away. Um, and that was the birth. Yeah.
Beautiful. And did you stay in the pool for the placenta as well?
Um, so this had been kind of, I had no fears around birth, but this was another thing with having a midwife that kind of had to tick the boxes. I was worried about the whole them expecting you to birth a placenta really fast when really it can take any amount of time that it needs to take. Um, so this was something that I was kind of anticipating. Like I was like, is it going to be fast or is it going to take 8 hours? And I'm going to have to tell the midwives this is you'll just have to wait or like. But I got out of the pool. She had like a really short cord, so I kind of weirdly maneuvered out of the pool, and then I sat down just by the pool, and it was the craziest thing and not what I was expecting. The placenta kind of just plopped out
Yeah.
like really fast, um which was awesome because it had definitely been kind of, I don't know if it was a fear, but it was more like I didn't want to be uncomfortable in telling the midwives that we were going to sit here and wait however long we need to wait for the placenta to arrive. Um, so I was kind of relieved that it just came out when it did, and I could just chill out and
And
not.
yeah, and most of the time that happens, you know.
Yeah,
Most of the time that happens. Placentas are really
yeah,
great at being bathed, just like babies.
yeah,
And the key component to ensuring the optimal way for the placenta to be bathed is to really keep that love bubble intact. So just what
yeah,
the midwives did, they stood back. You guys had your, moment, your love bubble moment in the bath. And,
yeah,
you got to, I don't know, did you know it was a girl, for example, or like, you got to experience your baby and
yeah,
see baby's face and like fingers and toes and like have that beautiful high of the love
yeah,
peak of oxytocin. And that's what's needed. And so, I know that there's stories with placentas taking a long time, but that's not the rule. That's an exception,
yeah,
right? So most of the time,
yeah,
placentas just come out. And sometimes
yeah,
you need to sit on the toilet and just like help it a bit or squat and use gravity or wiggle around, walk
yeah,
around a bit, like in the room, you know what I mean? And
yeah.
snuggle and breastfeed and bond and it will come out.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened. Like it was the biggest high of my entire life,
Yeah.
and it's like at the time it wasn't even a thought. Like this was more like leading up to the birth. It was on my mind, but at the time, like it wasn't even you when you're holding your baby that you're just meeting for the first time. You don't even think about that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it was amazing,
I love that.
and just to do it in the living room was the best thing ever.
Yeah. Did you squat? Did you lie down? Did you stand?
No, I was sat there kind of just like leaning back on my sofa.
Mm-hmm.
And it just like plopped out. Yeah,
Oh,
it was,
amazing.
yeah, I didn't do anything.
I love that.
It was great. Yeah. I
Mm.
was just kind of holding Penelope.
Mm.
Yeah.
There's something else you'd
Um,
like to share about the postpartum there, the first hours after birth?
I think like for me it was really important to just be undisturbed until I wanted or if I wanted anyone to kind of do anything. So it was really important for me to just hold the baby and I really wanted to make sure that she latched on. Um, and kind of like no one else interfered, and the midwives were so respectful, which was amazing. Like they didn't try and take her anywhere or measure her or anything like that until like way later on. And then when they asked if I wanted them to, which was exactly what I wanted,
Yeah.
and it was so kind of respectful. And um, yeah, we chilled out. We just chilled out. We breastfed, and then we ordered a pizza, and it was perfect.
What
um,
pizza did you order?
It's in New Zealand. There's this chain of pizzas called Hell's, and they just do this amazing pizza with vegan cheese. And I think we just got one of those with loads of olives and beautiful vegetables on it. And also, I didn't mention before, but my dog was present for the whole birth. And it was really nice after, just to introduce him to Penelope. And it was beautiful kind of seeing him be like, what, who the hell is this that's just kind of come. But it was funny having an animal there, because my midwife had said she'd never been at a birth with an animal before. Well, a dog. And he just had such great kind of like intuition to know that what was going on. It was amazing. And then it's almost like he knew she was a baby, and not to do anything crazy, and like not to kind of jump up at her or anything. It was great.
Yeah, they're so wise and intelligent.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he
I love
really
that.
was.
Wow, beautiful. So if you had a first-time mama in front of you right now who's about to have her first baby, and she really wants to have a natural and empowering birth experience, what advice and pearls of wisdoms would you give to her?
I know absolutely everyone says this, but it's all about trust, and trust in your body, trust in your baby. And I think for me, it was kind of thinking about every other mammal on planet Earth and how they give birth. And there's no reason why you can't do the same thing. And yeah, just the belief that your body is made and equipped to do this, and you don't need to have any fear. And you can just sit back and relax and give birth.
Sit back and relax. And I don't know if that's the exact
Yeah,
way of
maybe
doing
not relax.
it.
But I think more in the sense of kind of like you don't need to worry that everything's gonna, you need to do all these things or prepare. Like I think for me it almost was like I felt like I could really just chill out and let my body, like, not relax, but kind of I was relaxed in the sense that I knew I didn't have to worry about what to do, if that makes sense.
But that was because you prepared, though. You listened to birth
Yeah,
stories from the
it's
beginning.
true.
So,
Yeah,
preparation can look very differently for everybody, but it is
yeah,
that how can I trust? And
yeah,
because today, without preparation, women don't know about the physiology because we were never taught that, right?
yeah,
So I think in your way, however you do it, whether that is a course, having a doula, listening to this podcast,
yeah,
looking at birth videos, preparing your mind so that you really can trust,
yeah.
right?
I think it's, for me it was blocking out the negativity and just surrounding myself with the podcast, the positive podcasts, the videos. And then before you know it, you've rewired your subconscious and you just associate birth with the most amazing natural like part of life.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's totally possible to rewire the brain. But unfortunately, yeah, I think from birth, from all the media we take in, like movies and
Mm.
television and stuff, it's not what they teach us, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah, but that's why podcasts like yours exist, and all the others, and women sharing their amazing stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly that. And so thank you for coming on and sharing yours, because you and other women like you who want to share their positive, natural, empowering birth stories are the ones that keep this podcast going. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It was great to finally come on after listening to it for so long.
Yeah, such a pleasure having you. Thank you for listening. If you love this podcast, then please consider sharing it, leave a review, or make a contribution on our Patreon page. And if you want to connect on social media, then find the podcast on Instagram as the Natural Birth Podcast. Thank you for listening.